Welcome back. In this segment, we're going to talk about the essence and heart of discipleship, and more specifically, why sometimes we make it a little bit harder than really it ought to be. Many times throughout my life as a youth and young adult pastor, I'd have conversations with young adults, and I would challenge them or encourage them to go make disciples, to go find someone that they could disciple. And quite frequently, the response I would get was something based in fear, something like, "Oh, I could never do that. I haven't been to seminary," or "I haven't been to Bible college," or "I don't know enough to be a disciple maker. I could never do that well." And I have to quite frequently look at them and say, it's okay. It's not that hard. You can do it. Honestly, discipleship is intentional friendship with someone, helping them to learn what you have already learned. Similarly, what I mentioned in the previous segment when we talked about the rabbis that would seek to pass the baton to the next generation of rabbis. They were seeking to find people that they could train up and mentor to embrace their yoke, their theology, their philosophy, their lifestyle. In essence, that's what we as Christians are called to do. We're called to go find people, go be friends with them, and then teach them to know all that we know. Everything you've learned about God, everything you've learned about the Bible, everything you've learned about how to remain connected to God is what you want to be sharing with other people. Now, quite frequently, people will say, well, what if I don't know everything? That's okay. The goal of discipleship is not to teach everything. If that was the goal, none of us would be successful because none of us know everything. The goal is not to teach everything. The goal is to simply teach what you know. Sometimes that teaching looks to be a little more formal and structured. We'll talk about that later in the course. And sometimes the goal of teaching gets manifested in a more informal manner where you're just hanging out with someone, you're spending time with them, and you're allowing them to learn from you. The goal is to assess, what are the things that I have learned? What are the things that I have picked up along the way? And how can I be a friend to someone in such a way that they can then pick up what I have absorbed over the last several years of following Jesus? One of my favorite pastors and authors today is a man named Mark Dever. He's a pastor at Capitol Hill Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. He's written quite a bit about the topic of discipleship. And he defines discipleship with a very simple definition that I think is extremely helpful. Dever says this: discipleship is nothing more than Christ-centered friendship. That's it. Can you be a friend to someone? Then you can make disciples. It's that easy. Go find someone who needs a friend. Go be a great friend to them, and then intentionally teach them all that you've learned about God. And you may say, Kenny, what if what I've learned about God is really minimal? What if I've only learned a little bit about the Bible? Great. Go teach that little bit about the Bible. And over the course of this course, we will teach you quite a bit on how to do that. We'll give you some wisdom, some tips, and some techniques on how you can teach that. But I think it's important for you to remember that anyone who loves Jesus can be a disciple maker. The goal isn't to have an exhaustive plan to take someone from being a new believer to the most mature believer ever. You're not trying to take someone from new believer to missionary in a matter of a few weeks. That's not the primary goal. The goal is go be a good friend, and whatever you happen to know about God, whatever it is on the inside of you that the Lord has given you, that God has put on the inside of you, go share that with someone else. In essence, that is what being a great disciple maker is all about. The final thought before we end this segment is bringing up a modern system that I think is somewhat similar to the first century Jewish system where rabbis would recruit potential new rabbis. And that's a system of apprenticeship that we have here in North America in our contemporary context. People like master plumbers and public adjusters and other people within various vocations and trades will frequently recruit people to work under them to learn from them. Let's say, for example, you want to be a commercial real estate appraiser. There are some academic components to your training. You have to take some legal and finance classes, classes on real estate norms, things of that nature. And you could take those courses typically at just about any college. Even most community colleges in the United States offer those sorts of courses. But you only have to take a few courses because the bulk of your training is not in the classroom if you're training to be an appraiser. To be a licensed appraiser in most states, you have to spend X number of hours working under someone who is already a licensed appraiser. I think this is, in essence, how discipleship ought to look. If you're going to be an appraiser in most states, here in our contemporary context, you take a few classes and then you go work, let's say, 2,000 hours under an appraiser. You are functionally an assistant to that appraiser. And when you're first starting out, you're just kind of doing the bare minimum. The appraiser may give you a few small tasks here and there. In some cases, you're not doing much. You're just sort of tagging along, following the appraiser around as the appraiser is doing his or her job. The appraiser may go back to the office to fill out a report to talk about the particular value of a particular property, or to fill out a report on the condition of a particular piece of real estate. And you may just sit there and watch. And the appraiser may take a moment to point out, okay, when I'm doing this, you do this. And when I'm doing this, remember this. And kind of teaching you the way to be a good appraiser. In essence, that appraiser is giving you his or her yoke. The appraiser is giving you his or her ideology and opinion on how a good appraiser ought to do his or her job. That's what an appraiser ought to be doing. And that's what an apprentice does in the appraising trade. You work under an appraiser. And over the course of time, that appraiser will then give you more and more responsibility. And ultimately, by the end of your apprenticeship, by the end of that 2,000 hours or 3,000 hours, and in most cases, the apprentice is actually doing most of the work. In fact, in the real estate world, it's sort of a joke. When you're the apprentice, toward the end of your hours, you're doing all the work, and the licensed appraiser is just sort of sitting back, watching, just sort of sitting back, observing, making most of the money and watching you do all the work. And then eventually, once you've completed all of those hours, you can then take an exam and apply for a license. And you yourself can become a licensed appraiser in that state. And again, that's the case in many of our trades today, like within the electrical world or within the plumbing world, within carpentry. That is a normal way that we train up the next generation within the trades. When I look at the trades like that, I say to myself, that's how discipleship ought to be within the Christian church. Me as a pastor and church leader, my primary goal is to find young people, or maybe not so young people, that I believe could do what I do, or maybe even do it better. And my goal is to bring them in and to train them, to kind of show them the ropes, to have them be with me in the office, be with me as I do tasks, be with me as I prepare sermons, to go grab lunch with them and dialogue about all the things that's going on, to maybe even have them in on various pastoral tasks or leadership meetings and things of that nature. Again, with the goal in mind being training them to do what I currently do. That is the heart and essence of discipleship. And quite frankly, it's not that hard. Go be a friend to someone. Invite them into your life. Have them be a part of your life and have them learn from you. I remember several years ago, I had an older man in my life who I really respected and trusted in many ways. And I thought he was a great husband and a great father. And I basically said to him, would you mind if I just hang out with you and your family sometimes? It was a little bit random, but he said, sure. Because I wanted to just be around him when he was around his wife and children, because he was such a great dad. I wanted to learn from him on how to be a great husband and a great dad. He was discipling me, not by necessarily sitting down with me and taking me through a curriculum, although that might be valuable, and not necessarily by teaching me in an academic setting, although that might be valuable as well. His discipleship of me was merely allowing me to be a part of his everyday life, in his home, having dinner with them, hanging out with them, spending time with them, so that I could absorb from him what real fatherhood and what great husbandry, if that's a word, what great husbandry looks like. He was discipling me in the manner that he had learned from an older man in his life. That's what discipleship is all about. Be friends with someone, invite them into your life, interject yourself into their life, and allow them to learn from you all that you have learned. Whether that list of things you've learned is small or large, you've got something to offer. I'd encourage you to go do that. In the next segment, we're going to dive into some of the practical things that you have to do if you're going to be an effective disciple maker.